The committee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. It is with a heavy heart that I convene today's hearing to examine the rise of extremism and violence against LGBTQI+ people in the United States. Last month, a person with an AR-15 style assault rifle entered Club Q, a nightclub that served as a haven for LGBTQI+ people in the Colorado Springs community, and opened fire on unsuspecting bar patrons and staff. The attackers' depravity robbed us of 5 innocent lives: Daniel Ashton, Raymond Green, Vance, Kelly Loving, Ashley Poe, and Derek Rump. More than a dozen people were injured in the rampage, and family members and loved ones who were left reeling have been forced to pick up the pieces. My heart breaks for those who endured this ruthless act of violence. The Club Q shooting represents an attack on all sacred places for LGBTQI+ people across the country that offer the promise of community and refuge from rampant bigotry. In attacking Club Q, the shooter targeted the sense of safety among the LGBTQI+ people across the country, a feeling of security to which they are entitled. The attack on Club Q and the LGBTQI community is not an isolated incident, but part of a broader trend of violence and intimidation across our country. Earlier this month, a group of extremists appeared at a Lakeland, Florida arts festival featuring drag performances to harass and intimidate performers and attendees. The extremist group, whose faces were concealed by masks, carried a banner with anti-LGBTQI+ slurs and raised their arms in Nazi salutes. And in my own community in New York City, home of Stonewall and the international capital of the LGBTQI+ rights movement, a man was arrested for throwing bricks at the windows of a gay bar on 4 different occasions. These actions are the culmination of years of anti-LGBTQI extremism that began in state houses across the country and spread to social media platforms before boiling over into the communities where we reside. In 2018, Republicans in state governments across the country introduced 110 pieces of legislation targeting the health and safety of LGBTQI people. In the past legislative session, this number tripled to more than 340 pieces of anti-LGBTQI legislation. These bills, which villainize LGBTQI+ people in classroom settings and target health care for LGBTQI people, and more directly threaten the freedom of LGBTQI people to live authentically and safely. For example, one piece of legislation signed into law by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis prohibits teachers from even mentioning LGBTQI+ people in classrooms. This, quote, "don't say gay or trans," end quote, law erases the existence of LGBTQI people and families and muzzles our nation's brightest educators. Within a month of Florida passing this legislation, 2 additional states passed similar bills. In total, 48 bills in more than 20 states have considered eliminating or suppressing LGBTQI people and history in the school curriculum. Here in Congress, dozens of House Republicans have co-sponsored federal legislation to prohibit federal funding for schools with curricula that affirms LGBTQI people. And Republicans at every level of government have gone even further to villainize transgender people, targeting their ability to access necessary health care and restricting their freedom to participate as full members of our society. These hateful pieces of legislation have fueled dangerous rise in extreme anti-LGBTQI rhetoric following the passage of Florida's Don't Say Gay or Trans law, vitriolic social media content accusing members of the LGBTQI community of being groomers skyrocketed by more than 400%. The committee received a video submission from Mrs. Sarah Kate Ellis, the president and CEO of GLAAD, one of the nation's leading LGBTQI+ media advocacy organizations, explaining the proliferation of anti-LGBTQI+ extremism across our media landscape and its relationship to the kind of violence we observed at Club Q. I'd like to play this video now, if we could.
Thank you, Chairwoman Maloney, and thank you, leaders from Colorado Springs. GLAAD tracks and reports dangerous conditions for LGBTQ Americans. And I want to be very clear. We currently live in an unsafe America for LGBTQ people. The horrific attack at Club Q is yet one more avoidable symptom of a larger epidemic plaguing our nation, a culture of anti-LGBTQ rhetoric and violence from politicians and political extremists. Consider these facts that GLAAD tracked this year. Over 300 anti-LGBTQ state and local bills proposed. Bomb threats to 20 children's hospitals that offer medically safe health care to transgender youth. Nearly 150 attacks on LGBTQ events, and a new GLAAD poll found 48% of LGBTQ people and 72% of transgender respondents fear for their safety in the current political environment. Why is this happening? It starts with candidates and politicians who deliberately spread disinformation and anti-LGBTQ inflammatory political messaging. It continues with media. Fox News aired 170 anti-transgender segments in a 3-week span. The New York Times is approaching transgender healthcare as a debate as opposed to settled medicine, according to every major medical association. This rhetoric gets amplified on social media, where hate gets organized into action. Facebook too often refuses to act on the content that spread lies. On Twitter, New Media Matters data shows the maliciously defamatory slur groomer increased over 1,200% from 9 accounts since Elon Musk took over. This behavior is all exacerbated when bad actors have easy access to assault weapons. There is a direct line from dangerous words to violent behavior for the LGBTQ community. We can stop the lies and violence only if we work together. We all deserve to be safe in America. Thank you.
Thank you. As Republicans have fanned the flames of bigotry, Democrats have remained committed to protecting and advancing the health, safety, and rights of the LGBTQI+ people. Last year, House Democrats passed the Equality Act, landmark legislation that would enshrine protections against discrimination for LGBTQI+ people into law. And this past June, to commemorate Pride Month, this committee shepherded the LGBTQI+ Data Inclusion Act to House passage. This groundbreaking legislation would expand federal data collection efforts to improve our ability to understand and address the specific challenges facing the LGBTQI+ people. More than 200 House Republicans voted against each of these pieces of legislation. As a longtime public servant, the fight for LGBT+ equality is one that has always been close to my heart. As a New York City Council member, serving the very community where the famous queer activist Eddie Windsor resided, I was proud to introduce the first legislation recognizing domestic partnership in New York State history. Just last week, Congress took the historic step of protecting the right to same-sex marriage under federal law, and President Biden signed it into law yesterday, with over 5,000 Americans on the lawn of the Capitol appreciating this act. But the work of ensuring that LGBTQ+ people can live authentically and safely is only just beginning. Today, we will hear from some of the nation's leading experts regarding the rise of anti-LGBTQI extremism, the damage it inflicts upon our communities, and the steps we must take to eliminate it. I am pleased to welcome the new president of the Human Rights Campaign, Ms. Kelly Robinson, for her first appearance before Congress. We will also hear directly from survivors of the violent Club Q attack, and I am deeply grateful for the bravery of these individuals in recounting their horrific experiences. Their testimony will serve as a tremendous public service for their community and for our nation. Thank you. Let us honor them by recommitting to the bold action necessary to ensure that every person in the United States can experience the freedom to live authentically and safely, regardless of who they love or how they identify. I now yield to the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Comer from Kentucky, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank our witnesses who have joined us today for our last full committee hearing under Chairman Maloney's tenure, and I'll have more to say about that at the conclusion of the hearing. My thoughts and prayers go out to the Colorado and Florida shooting victims, families, and friends. No one should have to experience what you all have experienced. Let me state clearly, as we have consistently said, Republicans condemn violence in all forms. Unfortunately, Democrats are using committee time and resources today to blame Republicans for this horrendous crime. This is not an oversight hearing. This is a blame Republicans so we don't have to take responsibility for our own defund the police and soft on crime policies. Just a quick review of the facts tells us the individual responsible for these heinous crimes was not a stranger to law enforcement. In fact, the shooter was arrested last year for violent threats against their mother. And no doubt about it, this individual has a sad and troubled past with no parental support. But Democrats, as usual, have intentionally jumped to conclusions while ignoring the facts. Why? Because it's politically convenient to blame your political opponents. It's easier to blame Republicans than have a serious discussion about the rise in violent crimes across the nation, including this individual's horrendous crimes at Club Q in Colorado. It's easier, but it's also irresponsible and reckless. Instead, we should be focused on the alarming rise in violent crime across our country today, crimes that target all races and ethnicities. We are seeing rises in threats and crimes across many communities and institutions, including historically black colleges and universities, Asian communities, Jewish communities, and Christian communities. Churches and pro-life institutions are facing a historic increase in violence and targeted attacks, which go largely underreported. The Department of Justice has remained fairly silent as well. The rise in crime in America is the second largest concern for Americans, second only to this administration's inflation crisis. Recent data shows that violent crime increased by 4.2% nationwide over the first 6 months of 2022. In New York, violent crime increased by more than 40% compared to 2021. In Los Angeles, homicides reached their highest levels in 15 years during the first half of 2020. In New Orleans, homicides increased by 40%. Right here in D.C., homicides were up 14% from 2020 to 2021. Crime is simply out of control in large Democrat-led cities. The extent of the rise in crime, however, may even be worse than the current data shows. Recent reporting revealed the FBI's national crime data for 2021 was largely incomplete, lacking data from 37% of law enforcement agencies nationwide. The FBI's national crime data does not even include full crime reports from New York, Los Angeles, two of the largest and most crime-stricken cities in the country. On this committee, we should be using our time and resources to conduct oversight into the rise of violent crimes committed against all Americans and organizations. Every day, Americans, no matter what side of the aisle, are living in a high-crime environment. Democrats' defund the police movement has successfully taken resources from and crushed the morale of police forces across the country. Without the police, we lose our first line of defense for victims of all crime. In addition, Democrats have focused on electing leftist prosecutors with soft on crime policies and allowing crime to run rampant in the United States. No one wants to see horrific crime No one wants to see horrific events like what happened in Colorado and Florida occurring in America. More needs to be done to reverse soft on crime policies and refund the police to make the streets of America, cities and towns safe. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today, especially about the spike in crime across the country, under-policing, and increase in violence against all Americans. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.